Click to start. Smith, Marx, and Babbage, and the Saga of the Pin Factory. Smith, Marx, and Babbage. That's Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and Charles Babbage. We're going to learn about these three figures and how they are related to the Pin Factory. Welcome to the Dark Ages, also known as the Age of Absolutism. Kings and popes held absolute power over everyone. They held on to their absolute power by keeping everyone else absolutely in the dark. And for most people, their lives were absolutely dreadful. Until, just as the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation were winding down, somebody turned on the light. Welcome to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is also known as the Age of Reason, when a lot of new ideas began floating around, ideas like progress and liberty. A time of great thinkers and bold new dreams about democracy and tolerance. The Enlightenment opened people's minds, and it opened the doors to the modern forms of government, science, music, and art. It marked an end of absolute monarchies and the dogma of the Catholic Church. One of its most leading figures is someone you've heard of, Sir Isaac Newton. His motto was Sapere Aude, which is Latin, and it literally means dare to know. That became the slogan of the Enlightenment. Some people think it really means my karma ran over my dogma, but I think that's a joke. Another thing that you've probably heard of, a very notable thing to emerge from the Enlightenment, was created by these guys.
The Virginians emerged with the nation's capital.
And a few others.
The pièce de résistance.
The year is 1776. That's right. Talking about the United States of America. All of our founding fathers in the U.S. were members of the Enlightenment. They were enlightened leaders. But something else happened in that same year of 1776 that would soon shake the world. It was the publication of a book called The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. A book was published in Edinburgh, Scotland. It was called, actually, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nations, which turned out to be too long for most people to remember, so they shortened it to simply The Wealth of Nations. It is the very first book on the newly invented study of economics. It was written by Adam Smith, a leading moral philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment. Commerce, that's business, buying and selling, had been going on since the beginning of civilization, or at least since the invention of money. No one before Smith had actually scientifically studied exactly how it works. He was not a politician. He was not advocating any type of agenda. He was an observer, a scientist. He went to workplaces all across Scotland and England, and he noted what he saw, and he reported on what he saw in a very scientific manner. What he discovered was so accurate and was so insightful that his book is still being studied in economics classes to this day. Let's take a look at a few of his revolutionary brainstorm concepts. He talked about something called rational self-interest, that is, using reason for your own benefit. I call it RSI. It's an ideal situation. In an ideal situation, if the worker and the boss and the customer are all driven by rational self-interest, everybody comes out ahead. That's the worker, that's the boss, that's the customer. Now, the worker is happy when he is well paid and when he enjoys his work. The customer is happy when finding the best value for the best price. And it's the boss works hard to keep workers and customers happy so his business is a success and then he becomes happy. So rational self-interest works to everyone's benefit. That was Smith's point, and we're going to look at an illustration, and it's the one that he used. He talked about something called the free market, also known as the invisible hand. When he described the invisible hand of the marketplace, Smith used the example of an imaginary pin factory. In those days, and I think to this day, pins and needles are purchased was stuck into a piece of paper called a paper of pins. And he wanted to use an example of the most simple, the most trivial business to explain his theories, because he thought that if it would work there, it would work with any type of enterprise. And he was quite right. So he asked, who decides on the price of a paper of pins? I'd say it contains 25 pins. Is it the owner of the pin factory? Well, yes, it is, but he is guided by the invisible hand. If he sets the price too high, no one will buy them. If he sets them too low, he will lose money. So like magic, he sets it at exactly the right price as if guided by an invisible hand. And there's an image of the invisible hand for you. Let's say he puts out a sign and he says, well, I'm going to sell these pins for $1 a package. Well, the invisible hand comes along and says, you're going to lose money if you do that. So raise the price. So he says, okay, I'm going to change it to $3 a package. Well, no, the invisible hand comes along and says, that's too high. If you set it that high, people aren't going to pay that much. So he says, all right, I'll sell it for $2. And that's exactly right. It's kind of the Goldilocks theory. You know, not too high, not too low, just right. Okay. What about wages? Well, the boss has to pay people to make these pins. How much should he pay them? Again, the invisible hand will tell him, it will guide him. If he pays them too little, they won't be happy. They won't come to work. If he pays them too much, he'll lose money. So he pays them just the right amount. Just like the baby bear in the Goldilocks story. Okay, here we see an illustration. The boss is paying the worker, but the invisible hand says, wait a minute, that's not enough money. That worker is going to be unhappy. And we don't want unhappy workers because they won't do the job. So let's give him more money. Well, in this scenario, he's very happy. The worker, as you can see, is quite happy. But the boss is unhappy because he is going to lose money if he pays the worker that much money. So the invisible hand comes around again and exactly calculates the right amount of money to pay for the boss to pay the worker. Nobody's happy, nobody's unhappy, but the job gets done. Adam Smith loved the idea of competition. He saw great virtue in competition. It's another thing that keeps the boss from setting the price too high. He is not the only pin maker in town. There's another pin maker, at least one, and shoppers are free to buy their pins from any of them. If our guy sets his price too high, the competitor will sell their pins for less, and they will capture all of the business. Competition will also induce both of the pin makers not only to keep their prices down, but also to improve the quality of the pins. If people believe that Company A's pins are stronger and they last longer than Company B's, then Company A will sell more pins. Now here's a little illustration of what we mean by competition. Let's suppose there's a shop on the street that is named called Andy's Pins, and he puts up a sign that says, we have the best pins in town. Well, next door, Ben's Pins wants to do him one better, and he says, we have the best pins in the country. So Chuck's Pins, not to be outdone, puts up another sign, we have the best pins in the world. Dave, who's a clever guy, puts up a sign on the same street and says, we have the best pins on the street. That's a little joke about competition. Well, all this probably seems pretty darn obvious to us today. Remember, these were new concepts back in 1776. Smith determined scientifically how rational self-interest and competition can lead to economic prosperity. Now here's an image of Adam Smith's pin factory. The one thing you'll note about it is that the workers are all lined up in a row from one side of the room to the other. This is something that Smith thought was very, very interesting. Driven by his desire to make more money, he observed that the pin factory owner is always searching for ways to produce pins more efficiently. Efficiently means more pins by spending less money or less time. So he's always looking for that. The best example of how he accomplished this efficiency is something called the division of labor. Smith's example of division of labor started with an explanation of how to make a pin. Well, he explained that actually there are 18 different steps to making a pin, but for purposes of our illustration here today, we will condense them down to just 5, and here they are. The first is stretching and cutting the wire. The wire is the raw material, and you stretch it and you cut it. The next thing is to sharpen the point. The third step is to attach a head to the pin, which is a very delicate operation. A simpler job is next, painting the pins white. For some reason, people like all their pins to be white. And the final step then is taking the 25 pins and putting them into a paper holder. So those are the 5 steps of the pin making process. Okay? That's where you begin. Now, here is the old way of doing things before division of labor. Let's take a look. The shop owner hires 5 pin makers, and he pays each of them to do the whole job. Each of them performs all of the 5 steps in order. Here they are, workers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So worker number 1 stretches the wire, sharpens the pin, puts on the head, paints it white, puts it in the paper, and then he's done. He does every single step. And so do all of the others. So you've got 5 people, each working independently, in tandem with each other, in a parallel fashion, each of them doing the same thing as the other. Now, this is not a very efficient setup. Each of the 5 pin makers, for example, needs to own a set of tools to perform each step. And while he or she is performing one of the steps, the tools for the other 4 steps are idle. They're not being used. So say, for example, worker number 1, he needs, here are the 5 tools that are required for the job, and he needs the first tool, but while he's doing that step, none of the other tools are being used. And the same holds true for all of the others. As you can see, while one tool is used, the others are laying idle. So you've got all these tools. Most of the time, none of them are being used. They're not being used. So it's not a very efficient system, as you can see. Another problem. Some of the steps require craftsmanship, while other steps are mechanical drudgery. But the shop owner needs to pay top dollar wages. Wages paid to an artisan, to a craftsman, to all 5 of them, even though they are only doing highly skilled labor part of the time. They all have to receive the highest payment amount available, because part of the time they are doing high quality work. Most of the time they're not. Again, this is not efficient. Everyone gets paid top dollar even though they're not doing top dollar work. Another problem with doing things the old way. Each of the pin makers works at a different pace. Each one takes a different amount of time to carry out each of the steps. Pin maker number 1 may be very good at stretching and cutting, and he does that step very quickly, but while sharpening takes him much longer. The production cycle is not done until the slowest of the pin makers finishes all 5 steps, even though the other 4 finish sooner, and they're now forced to sit around and wait while the slowpoke catches up. As you can see down here in the illustration, the arrows represent the amount of time that is required to do each of the steps by each of the different people. They all have to wait for number 4, who's the slowest. Not a very efficient process. Let's take a look at the numbers, okay? The shopkeeper buys enough raw metal wire to make 2,500 pins. He pays $25 for that spool of wire. It takes one pin maker working alone about 30 minutes to make 25 pins, or 50 pins an hour is the rate of one pin maker. It takes 5 pin makers working in tandem a half an hour to make 125 pins, or 250 pins every hour. So all 5 of them will make 250 pins every hour. It takes all 5 pin makers 10 hours to make 2,500 pins or 100 packets of 25 each. They all work 10 hours a day, and at the end of the day, they've made 2,500 pins. And they put those into packets of 25, so they've got 100 packets at the end of the day. The shop owner pays each of the pin makers the same, $10 a day or $50 for all 5 workers every day. The shop owner sells each packet of pins for $1, so he takes in $100 every day. 100 packets, $1 each. There you go. From this, he deducts his material cost of $25 for the spool of wire and his labor cost of $50. That leaves him $25 profit each day. Now that's a little complex, so I've summarized it here on ye old spreadsheet. The cost of the wire, total cost $25. One pin maker makes 50 pins in an hour. Okay? 5 pin makers make 250 pins in an hour. 5 times 50. 5 pin makers working 10 hours make 2,500 pins, 10 times 250, and they put 25 pins in a packet for 100 packets a day. Got it? Each pin maker makes $10 a day, total $50 labor expense. Each packet sells for $1. All 100 packets are sold every day. The boss takes in $100 every day. But then he has to pay out $25 for the wire and $50 for the workers. He makes a profit of $25 every day. Got it? Remember that, because we're going to revisit that in a minute. There's got to be a better way. One day, a light bulb goes off over the boss's head. That's why this period was called the Enlightenment. And he says, if I arrange these 5 workers in series rather than in parallel, things would go much faster. I could sell more pins. I could make more money. That's sick. He is operating under RSI, okay, rational self-interest. And that's what caused the light bulb to go off. So that's exactly what the pin factory owner did. Here are 5 workers, okay, in parallel. He moves them into series. Now each worker is only going to do one task. The owner found the pin maker who was the best and the fastest at stretching and cutting and gave him tools just for that purpose. He sold all the other tools. He only needed one set of tools. He's doing the same thing all day. Worker number 1 would now do nothing else but take the raw wire, stretch it, and cut it all day. When he was done with a batch, he would pass them on to worker number 2, and so on down the line. Ta-da! The division of labor is born. All right, let's illustrate that. Let's have a look. Okay, each one has a different job. It does the same job all day. Each one has just one set of tools, the tools that they need. They don't need all those different kinds of tools, much more efficient. And matching the best worker for each part of the job. The best stretcher got the stretching job. The best head attacher got the head attaching job. The best painter got the painting job. Worker number 2 was the best and quickest at sharpening. That's all she did all day long. And then she passed her sharpened pins on to the next worker. Like worker number 1, all the other workers only needed the tools for his or her specialized job. Worker number 3 was an expert at attaching the pinhead. Now this was difficult precision work, required special skills. But after doing nothing else for a while, she became very adept, very skillful, and she was able to work very quickly in order not to slow down the progress of the line. Known as what? The assembly line. That's right, that's what this was. The painter and the paper sticker, those were easy tasks. Almost any child could do that quickly. And we'll talk about children doing this kind of work a little bit later. By using this assembly line method, this assembly line approach, the owner was able to double the production from 100 packets of pins to 200 packets of pins every day. Dramatic, huh? Now let's take another look at the numbers. The shopkeeper now buys enough raw metal wire to produce 5,000 pins for $50. Okay, each spool is 25. He buys 2 spools. It takes the assembly line 1 hour to make 500 pins. There are no idle tools. There are no idle workers. All the tools are being used, and everyone is working all the time. Working 10 hours a day, the pin factory now produces 5,000 pins, or 200 packets of pins per day. The shop owner still sells each packet for $1, and now his daily revenue grows from $100 to $200. From this, he deducts his material cost of $50. His labor cost goes down because he only has to pay one of the workers the high rate of $10 a day. He can pay the other four only $6 or $8 a day. This brings his total daily labor cost down to $38 a day instead of $50. Deducting this amount leaves the owner a daily profit of $112 every day. Simply by rearranging the workflow, he didn't spend any money. He didn't buy a new factory. He didn't hire new workers. He didn't do anything. He just moved people around, just shuffled them around. That's all he did. And by doing that, he increased his profit from $25 to $112 a day. And that does not take into account the money he saves by not needing 5 sets of tools for each worker. We're not even talking about that. Let's go back to the spreadsheet and take a look now. The cost of the wire, $50. The assembly line production rate, 500 pins per hour. 10 hours, 5,000 pins, put 25 of them in a packet. That creates 200 packets every day. The shop owner sells the packets for $1 each. Daily revenue, he takes in $200 gross revenue a day. Okay, shop owner pays one worker $10 a day, but the others $4, $6, or $8 a day. Total labor expense, $38 a day. The shop owner deducts the cost of the materials, he deducts the cost of the labor, so 200 minus 50 minus 38 equals $112 a day profit. Profit goes from $25 a day to $112 a day, an increase of $87 a day, an increase of almost 350% just by moving people around, not spending a nickel to do it. Let's take a look at that. The old way versus the new way. $25 versus $112. As you can see, that is very attractive. That does satisfy the owner's rational self-interest. Okay, who benefits from all of this increased efficiency? Well, obviously, the shop owner. He's increased his profits by nearly 350% without having spent a nickel. But the increased profit also allows him, if he so chooses, to reduce the price of his pins from $1 a packet down to 79 cents. Now, why would he do that? He'll make less money per packet, but he'll make it up in volume. When his competitors' customers all flock to him because he is now the low price leader. He'll sell more pins. Eventually, the competing pin maker will have to lower his prices too in order to remain competitive. And as we know, when companies compete, it is the customer, it is the consumer who wins. Okay, there is the competitor selling pins at $1 a packet. Okay, here comes all of the customers. I've depicted them here as ants, but you can see they're all going to buy their pins there at Andy's Pins. Now along comes Ben's Pins and says, I'm going to sell mine for 79 cents. Hey everybody, take a look at me. Well, what happens? The customers start flocking over to Ben's because he's selling them for less and they want to save money in there because of their own RSI. So what happens eventually? Yeah, just as we predicted, Andy has to change the price of his pins. Paper pins, no more $1. Now 79 cents have to meet the competition if he wants to stay in business. Who benefits from all of this? Well, the shopper. He's paying less money for the pins. That's a good thing. That satisfies the shoppers, the consumers' rational self-interest. What about the workers? Well, because of increased profits, the shop owner can now afford to pay his workers more money. This allows him to attract the best workers out there and thereby manufacture the finest pins in the land. He can pay top dollar. Now he's making so much money and he gets great people to work for him. It also allows him to provide performance bonuses to employees who do a good job. The boss shares his profits with his workers who work hard. That gives them an incentive to work harder. And the harder they work, the more money the boss makes and the more money that the worker makes. It's a virtuous cycle. The workers benefit because not only are they making more money, but each one is doing the one job that he or she is best at. And this creates job satisfaction and pride in the work product. As a result, the quality of the pins goes up and the price comes down, which is good news for the consumer. Okay? So once again, we've got the worker giving more money, the boss giving more money to the worker through profit sharing and performance bonuses. And the reaction is that the worker works hard, works smarter, the boss gives him more money. And who benefits from this cycle? The shopper, the consumer, the customer. all of us. Let's wrap it up. Thanks to rational self-interest, the boss, guided by the invisible hand of the marketplace, has made the workflow of the pin factory more efficient. He did this by implementing division of labor, which results in a win-win-win situation. The boss wins because his business makes more money. He's a winner. The workers win because they are making more money and doing the work they enjoy. Another winner. And the customer wins because they get better quality product at a lower price. Win, win, and win. These economic principles that were developed by Adam Smith in 1776 are collectively known today as capitalism. Capitalism is at the fundamental core of the system, the economic system, that built America into the most powerful and successful economy in the history of the world. Smith's book was called A Wealth of Nations, but wealth did not refer only to money. True wealth, also known as prosperity, is defined as the ability to provide the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number of people for the greatest amount of time. Adam Smith believed, and history has proven him correct, that capitalism is the system that accomplishes this better than any other. Adam Smith's ideas influenced some of the greatest figures of that era and the era that followed. The era that followed the Enlightenment, known as the Industrial Revolution, or the rise of the machines. And we're going to look at that next. We are going to look at one such thinker who took Smith's ideas and applied them not merely to machines that could make pins, but to machines that could actually think. His name was Charles Babbage. He's known today as the father of the computer. There he is, and one of his early devices. We will continue this next time. Thank you.